Good afternoon, traders. This is Christian from Hertz Tropica Trade Group, and it is February 11th, Thursday. One more day of the week. I don't know. It feels like it's been another long week to me, but it is just Thursday. Tomorrow is Friday, and then of course we have a 3-day weekend. So for me, it feels like a long week, but nice to have a 3-day weekend. I think nice too. I think at this point, what I'm feeling is that this has been a really nice start of well, it's not so much a start of February because it is February 11th already, but it's been a very nice month, and it's kind of at this point, you know I think doing like a review of where you are for the month, and how much more that you're basically looking for the month, right? We've talked about that the last couple days in the Tribeca Trade Group trading room, where we've talked about doing looking at your positions at this point. We know that the market has been on a very nice run, but some things, we're seeing some sell programs kind of come in various different times of the day, and you're getting these little bit of pullbacks. So, some of the things, some of the tricks that I try to do, right? I mean, I trade both options and both stock. Sorry, I trade option, I trade both options and stock. So I make adjustments, right? I talk about that a lot in trading, right? I try not to trade too much short-term risk, right, with options. And unless I'm really thinking that the market is in an upswing, I may press a little bit more. But if we're starting to do kind of this, right? Let me go to the daily chart here. Right, if we're kind of like starting not necessarily rolling over, because we are still above all these short-term moving averages. And if I think it's kind of been a little bit of a mature swing, I try to get not exactly defensive, but just cognizant of where we've been. My goal on a lot of days when we start, when there's a little bit of a gap up, and I think there was a nice note out today from Sentiment Trader. This is a concept that I talk a lot about, in regards to how much of the move, the overall move, is made in the after hours market versus in the during the cash open, and it's at extremes. Over the past month, S&P Qs, IWM have gapped up at least 20 basis points at the open on average 14 times. That's a new record for all three funds. So if you look at the performance again today, which we'll bring that up here. And by the way, risk disclaimer in front of you: everything that we're going through is for information purposes only. I understand that these YouTube videos are taking longer and longer to render the high def version. Sometimes it takes over an hour. Somebody asked me to zoom in on my spreadsheet. I put this on Twitter, so you could follow along as I'm looking at this. Just bring up the screenshot that I send out on Twitter, and you can kind of look at that. I mean, I can zoom in for you, but you have it. It's on the screen print that whenever I send these videos out, it's on my Twitter feed, so you can go through this at your own leisure. Or have it up as I go through it. But notice that once again, right, when we look at these intraday moves for the S&P, the Qs, the diamonds, IWM actually fell from the open, but they're actually like giving back gains through the session, right? So whenever I see the market kind of open up, 20 basis points to up, or at least sometimes, I should say definitely up around a 0.5%, I'm always a net seller on the open, right? I'm always locking things in. It's very counterintuitive. I think a lot of day traders, they like to come in, they don't care what the market does overnight. They're looking to like make some moves in the first 15 minutes. I'm doing the opposite, right? If you kind of look at the blotter of what I'm doing, right? If we go to the trades channel here, right? I'm selling, right? I took targets in Nvidia, I took targets in Open, right? These things can all push higher. I'm aware of that, right? But I'm Zoom. I got out of my Zoom trade for $9. My call spread out at 9, paid for 70, right? I'm selling, selling, right? And then after a little bit, then I kind of let things die down. It's a different story. Like, we're not in the market right now where there's a lot of like pressure in the overnight session, right? I just went through and talked about how there's been tremendous amount of gains in the overnight session. So I sell into that. I'm a buyer more if we start the day down 0.5%, then of course I'm doing something different. But I think, to have this game plan in mind is that I'm selling a good, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I made six trades where I'm trimming in that first, 15, 20 minutes of the day. I'm not really looking to add. I try to let things settle down in the first hour, and then kind of go from there. Sometimes, like, I balance it out too. If As long as I know that I'm doing more selling, I could look for a quick trade. If something really catches my eye in the beginning of the day. Also, I say this, but there's always more than one way to make money in the market. If you're really good scalping off the first 5 minute bar or something like that, and you're really good being a disciplined trader like that, then stay at it, right? I'm not trying to tell anybody what to do. I'm just trying to help by sharing some of the things that I do to help, because when we're moving like this the last few days, right? We come into the open, we try to push a little bit higher, and donk, right? And then we try a little bit, we try to move a little bit higher again, and then, obviously we were kind of hanging around the top of value, and then we finally broke. But, we're kind of just moving around the edges a bit, right? We're not breaking down. It looked like we were gonna, I even said, oh geez, we're breaking value. By the time this 5 minute bar closed, I'm on the 5 minute chart, by the way, we closed back inside value. So it's a lot of chop. And if you look at these sectors, right, there's a lot of things. Once I kind of saw that we were hanging in there, then I started to actually, not so much buy the dip, because we really didn't get that much of a dip, but I looked at some things that were really strong today. Right? I looked at Taiwan Semiconductor, which I was watching just go basically straight up till about 12 o'clock. So, by the way, this would have been a good one to chase on the first 5 minute bar. And you can find these. It's just, I look at the overall market moves and I realize when it's more difficult or when it's a little bit easier. And I think anytime, again, I'll say it again, when the market starts higher, it invites sellers to come in, right, and take some profits at the beginning of the day. But Taiwan Semi, I caught this in here. I was like, hey, all right, it retraced about 50% of the move, and I want to be in some of these. These semis have really kind of turned the corner. And we started to see this like earlier in the week or towards the end of last week with things like Xilinx. I always get a couple of these names confused. But Lam Research, right? We saw a whole bunch of call buying in here. And remember, the sector was a little bit weak with Qualcomm Qorvo reporting. But, that's how you kind of find your buy opportunities. What else? I'm going to talk about the semiconductors for a couple minutes here, because I do like the group. So here's what Taiwan Semiconductor looks like. Big move. We've been seeing some big call buying in this one. Applied Materials also. Whoops, that's the wrong symbol. Applied Materials also broke out, right? So, we're hearing about all these chip shortages. Now, I'm not an expert on chips. There is somebody in the TTG trading room who is an expert on chips, and we had a webinar with him about a month ago. Maybe it was 3 weeks ago, and he really educated us on the chip cycles, right, and how long it takes to basically, it's so what I've learned is that, if there's chip shortages, which there are all over the place, you can't just go right away and start making new chips. There's a decent time of manufacturing time from when you start to make a chip to when it's finished. So it's not like they can just like ramp up production today and get them shipped out next week. It literally takes a long time. So I wanted to talk about two other names too, right? But we know like those names have been absolutely sizzling. Marvell looks pretty good here too, which saw some calls. I have to check to see if those increased open interest, but I'll tell you the chart looks pretty good. So let me talk a little bit about that. The chart setup versus option activity. A lot of the times we see option activity in multiple names. How I use option activity is a little bit different than most people, right? I just use it as a trade idea. I don't really say, oh, geez, they're buying calls. That means the stock has to go higher, right? I'll give you two examples, right? And I'll tell this trade I took earlier in the week, and then I put on a call spread last week. But now there's been call buying in Nvidia too, right? And now this is extending away from out of this pattern, which took a while. And the weekly chart looks fabulous if it closes here for the week, right? Look at this nice bar, right? So see call buying in this, and I look at the chart, and it speaks to me, right? We've got a technical break higher, beautiful. Right? I'll give you another example. AMD has seen more call activity than Nvidia. However, look at the chart. Right? It's just not. It's too difficult of a chart for me. Right? Some people think, oh, it's cheaper. It's a better buy. But to me, I have no technical signal to really trade against. I guess I could trade against 89 bottom of value, but I would rather go with the best in breed. I don't know why this name is hung up. Maybe it's because they have a pending deal, so maybe there's an overhang. But I don't want to be in a choppy name, right? Even if I have to chase a little bit, which I did chase on the first day, isn't this much better, right? Rather than trying to mess with something all in here, right? You wait for a little bit of confirmation and then you go with it, right? And right now, AMD. So I change my opinion day to day. If AMD starts to do something and it breaks out, I'm all about it, right? But if it's continuing to chop around here, just sitting at the 50-day moving average, there's better opportunities. So, I see there's a difference between patience and stubbornness. Patience is waiting for the signal, right? Sometimes you have a signal, but the name hasn't really reacted to it yet. It's chopping around and the signal's active, versus like stubbornness, which is I'm just going to get into the name. I like the name. It's a quality name. I think it's going to go higher, right? And not paying attention to what the chart is telling you. Here, the chart is telling me that it's just locked in a range, right? So what I do in this situation, because I am a fan of this company, I'm a big fan of AMD, but I'm not going to put the trade on until I get the technical signal, right? Or sometimes I tell people who really like names, right, and they've got a really big fundamental view, you could put on a starter position and then add to it on the breakout, right? So basically, I set an alert, and I know that this month, it just may not be this month. This value area is very wide, right? But the break would be 95.80. But do you see the difference? All this call buying, so maybe you caught it for a scalp trade earlier in the week, right? Or I guess that's last week. Monday. No, two. Yeah, that's last week. Right? Oh no, it's 2/8. It's Monday, right? So maybe you caught it for a scalp trade on Monday, right? And fine, that's great. But for me, like I'm doing something different, right? I'm looking for more bigger moves, right? I'm looking for, for swing trade setups for the most part. If I can catch a day trade here or there too, I do it. But what I'm referring to is the pattern for a swing trade, right? So that's a difference, and I think I try to illustrate this as much as possible because we see so many option trades on the tape, and really people only tout the ones that win, right? They could win for 15 minutes, but then after that, sometimes they stall out, right? So huge amount of call activity earlier in the week in AMD. It just didn't pan out, or maybe it didn't pan out yet. But I try to be very as realistic with what I'm seeing on the tape, rather than, I talked about this a little bit in yesterday's video. Rather than play the game that I see a lot of people do on Twitter, where they just talk about option activity for the ones that work, and the ones that don't work, they don't bring up again. So you have to be somewhat selective. All right, so that's I like to share these little tidbits of information in these things that have helped me. It took me I'll be honest, it took me a while to kind of develop this system. When I first was doing this with options, I heard about how option activity is great and so forth, and I would just follow every trade. And it took me a while to figure out that there was like 50% of them that worked and 50% of them that didn't work. So I had to build a framework around it, and I had to put together a system that I can make it work for me and make it work in terms of profitability, right? So that's how I kind of use things. All right. So another thing, right? Another example that I want to show you too. The Chinese internet names have been absolutely on fire. I tweeted out earlier, and I'm forgetting the symbol already because I had to look it up because I'm not in it. Let me see if I can find it. But in the meantime, I'll bring up the Chinese internet ETF, which is KWeb, right? So here's a good example, right? As I talked about in the beginning of the video, right? Look at how far this thing has gone, right? It's basically gone up like a straight line. So you have to ask yourself, right? Do you want to be looking for new opportunities in the Chinese internet names, considering they're this extended, right? What's the RSI on here? It's a 78, right? We're almost at 80, and we're almost at 80, which is hot. Or do you want to be kind of more taking profits into some of these things, right? So again, it's a difference of the way to kind of look at the overall group. ECNS. It's a tough symbol to remember. This is the small cap China Internet ETF, and if you look at the weekly chart, right, this thing has gone from 48 to 63. Very, very strong. But again, do you want to be looking for new opportunities in this space? Or do you want to be doing, okay, maybe some scalping, realizing that this group has momentum to it? Or do you want to be kind of selling a little bit into the strength, right? And waiting for it to consolidate, right? So these are the questions that I try to put in front of traders to make sure that they're seeing the whole picture. Because I always give you my viewpoint. Other than a few names that I think, like Baba, I think is very interesting here, and I actually started a position today in Baba because I think that the weekly chart, I've got a level to trade against, and I'm in stock. But overall, right? Because this is why, right? I'll give you the example of what happened with the pot stocks today, right? Doesn't it kind of look similar, right? So you have to realize that there's crazy momentum in certain areas of the market. We've seen it all over the place. We've seen it in the pot stocks. We've seen it in blockchain, crypto stocks. We've seen it in the Chinese internet names. We've seen it to some extent in the software names. We've definitely seen it in the clean energy names. But you have to realize, you have to look at the chart and say, how overbought are these things? Because they're going to come back in. Right? And sometimes the more that they go up like this and get overbought, which the pot ETF was a 90, got into the 90s in RSI, right? That's a place to be selling, right? Not to be looking for new. And I think what's so difficult right now, so I mean, it's down, this thing is down 24%. Right, so it's, even if you weren't in this group, and I'm not in it, I didn't really make any money on the way up either because I'm just not a big fan of these names. There's plenty of other groups to make money in, right? There's some of the ones that I mentioned it. So sometimes, like if I don't have a ton of conviction in a group, I don't trade it that much. But I mean, you look at this, Tillery was down 50% today, 50. So keep that in mind with the Chinese internet group that's now up a lot, and some other groups that get extended like this. You have to put these things in perspective, right, of where they are and versus like how much you want to risk in something that gets as extended as some of these momentum names. But I'll tell you one thing, like I think it's actually good for the market to see this group come back to earth a little bit. I think that when too many of these groups break out like this, to me it gets a little bit dangerous. Why does it get dangerous? Well, because look at what happened today, right? That's a pretty dangerous move from 34 down to 25, right? So it's the old stair. I mean, this was not the stairs up. This was also the elevator up, and you got the elevator down too. But yeah, I mean, I think it's healthier when things they don't have to go all to the extremes, right? They can break out, consolidate, break out, consolidate. Some of these things just got too extreme. So yeah, I would say, be mindful of some groups, right? Take a look, and that's every one of these indicators that I have on my charts, they do something for me, right? And if you are putting some of these things on your screen and you don't know what they're for or you don't use them, then take it off your screen, right? Some people like very clean blank charts. That's great. I like to say for something like Chinese Internet ETF, it's like, you look at the RSI, and it's a 78. Now, again, by the way, a lot of times, like for these things getting overbought, it's actually like, overall, big picture, it's actually a good thing. But in the short term, you know that a pullback, it's ripe for a pullback. The other way that I look at these things is it's priced to perfection, right? It's priced to absolute perfection, right? So you have anything bad, negative happens, the group's going to come in a little bit, okay? So that's how you watch your exposure, right? Now a group like this, first day of like the major, now it's made a nice move, no doubt about it since this, but there may be still some juice in the semi group because it doesn't look like a hockey stick yet, right? That's the pattern that I like to refer to. It's not exactly overbought. Now, it doesn't mean it's going to continue to get there, but I just see more opportunity. Like I would rather switch my money out of some of those really extended areas and maybe go into something like a semiconductor or maybe some other area, or maybe pull back and move into cash a little bit, right? That's the whole, that's how trading is done, right? To kind of the old rinse and repeat, right? Wait for signals, be patient, wait for signals, take some profits, try to let your winners run, try to have a couple really big winners, and then take those off and then be patient and wait for the next signals to materialize, right? It doesn't always have to be, take your money and put it to the next thing. Take your money and put it to the next thing. There can be a little bit of a break in between too. So again, the reason why I stress this a little bit is, I do see, in my own personal account too, that I have to be mindful, right, of where we are. And you always have to put things in terms of probability, and in a risk return framework. All right, so that's a couple things, but I have to tell you, I like the semiconductors. I like the Taiwan Semi. They're a little bit, they've already made a big move today, but I think that they could add to those gains. Biotech has been a little bit weak this week. So let's just go through a couple other sectors, right? So I actually like when this happens, right? Some people don't, right? But this made a nice breakout, and now it's starting to come in and consolidate a little bit, right? And that's the other thing that's nice about little small pullbacks, right? Is that you'll start to see better opportunities, come up. But you have to be a little bit prepared for it, right? You have to be increasing your cash balance a little bit as we go, right? A little bit, sometimes a lot. Depends. It's a personal, it is it's personal preference. All right, so it's kind of interesting that group is coming in a little bit. I feel like some of the clean energy names have kind of stalled out a little bit. That's fine too. Let these names come in a touch, right? All right, guys, we'll end it there. There's a bunch of other names. Oh, I didn't show what I trade. Yeah, so I showed what I traded in the beginning of the day. I mentioned that I did start a BABA position. Another name that I'm looking at is and I started a position. Teladoc, I think, reports in about a week. Maybe this thing kind of comes in a little bit further, right? So I would be adding into that. Beyond had a nice move here. Almost filled this gap, right? But if you look at this thing, it broke. Let me zoom out here for a minute. You got a nice little base, and you got a target to shoot for at 180, and then 185, right? For a little short-term swing. Also, a lot of calls today in Virgin Galactic. I don't know why, but they traded. They traded a whole bunch of short-term calls that expire tomorrow. No idea what they're up to, but you could trade this versus 5808, right? And then if it breaks back into here, maybe abandon that trade in the short term. Yeah, I tried it a little bit of lemon today too, and I got out of that. Here's a good example of something I did wrong. Nobody does that on Twitter. So this one, right? So Boeing, I'm like, hey, look at Boeing at the 50-day moving average. Kind of interesting. Maybe it can actually get going and get to this VPOC. Nope, it stalled out. So what do? I take off my trade. It was a small loser, right? And then I put my alert back at 214, right, or 215, right? But that's the whole thing is that I got into the trade for a technical break. The break didn't happen. I don't want to be patient because the signal's gone, right? So there's no reason to be stubborn and say, oh, geez, I don't want to admit that I'm wrong. Yeah, I am wrong, right? Because I didn't get the break, so I'm out of the trade, right? And then you move on. You move on to the next one. So many times I also see traders make that mistake. They don't want to admit that they're wrong, right? They have ego issues, right? Take the trade off. You might find something better while this thing is chopping around. The same thing with AMD, right? While all that time and energy and focus you're spending on names that may not be doing anything, you're missing the next best opportunity. All right, guys, so I'll leave it there. Plenty more to talk about, but the video is already 25 minutes. It's long. So have a great night, guys. See you tomorrow.